Hello everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to discover the emotional story behind a rainy day that changed everything for Tu Diem and Toàn. A day when Toàn quietly stayed by her side after realizing just how close he came to losing her. From silent care and heartbreaking exhaustion to warm family moments and hopes for a better future, this story will take you through every emotional moment on their small countryside farm. And if you enjoy stories filled with love, healing, and meaningful connections, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any upcoming videos. The morning after the first heavy rain of the season, the small farm finally felt alive again. After weeks of dry heat that had burned the fields and exhausted everyone working beneath the sun, the cool air drifting through the bamboo trees almost felt unreal. Rainwater still clung to the leaves outside, and small puddles reflected the grey morning sky across the muddy yard. The scent of wet earth moved softly through the open windows of the wooden house, while everything around the farm seemed quieter than usual, as if the storm had forced the world itself to slow down for a moment. But even with the peaceful weather, there was still a heaviness hanging inside the house that refused to disappear. Tu Diem sat near the kitchen table with a bowl of hot porridge in front of her, her face noticeably paler than normal after days of working under the harsh heat. She tried to act like she was recovering, quietly telling Toàn that she only had a slight headache and a sore throat left, but the weakness in her voice betrayed her immediately. Toàn stood near the doorway talking softly about the rain and the fertile soil he had managed to bring home the day before. He mentioned how lucky they were that the rain came afterward, because if the storm had started earlier, he would never have been able to carry the soil back to the farm. Normally, it would have sounded like an ordinary conversation between two people starting a peaceful morning together. But today, there was something different in the way Toàn kept watching her. Every time Tu Diem lifted the spoon, his eyes followed her. Every time she coughed lightly or lowered her head for too long, his expression tightened without him even realizing it. It was obvious he was trying very hard to stay calm, but the fear underneath that calmness was impossible to hide completely. Tu Diem noticed it too. That was why she kept trying to smile, trying to sound stronger than she really felt. She even mentioned helping him plant flowers later, or making cakes because the weather was finally cool enough to cook comfortably again after so many unbearable hot days. But Toàn immediately shook his head before she could continue. He told her she wasn't going harvesting, wasn't carrying anything, and wasn't stepping outside to work today. His voice stayed gentle, but there was firmness underneath every word. The kind of firmness that only appears when someone is truly scared. The sound of boiling water filled the kitchen, while rain continued dripping softly from the roof outside. For a few quiet seconds, neither of them said anything else, and somehow that silence carried more emotion than any dramatic argument could have, because viewers could already feel there was something deeper behind Tään's behavior. This wasn't simple concern anymore. It felt like he had already watched Tu Diem push herself too far once before, and now he was terrified of seeing it happen again. Even while preparing tea, he kept turning back to check on her. Even while talking about flowers and the garden, his attention never fully left her face for more than a few seconds. The farm itself looked peaceful after the rain, but inside that tiny house, there was an invisible tension that never faded. Tu Diem slowly tried to stand up after finishing a few bites of porridge, insisting she could at least help clean the dishes. But the moment she got to her feet, her body swayed slightly. Her hand immediately grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Tone reacted instantly. He dropped what he was holding and crossed the room before she could even pretend she was fine again. One hand caught her arm, while the other pulled a chair closer behind her. "Sit down," he said quietly, his voice lower this time. Tu Diem looked away, embarrassed at first, but she didn't argue anymore. Maybe because she finally realized she truly didn't have the strength she thought she did. Or maybe because she could finally feel how afraid he really was. Outside, the rain clouds slowly began to clear, allowing sunlight to touch the wet ground again. Steam rose faintly from the earth near the garden, while the farm slowly returned to life after the storm. But inside the house, Tone still couldn't relax. Tu Diem insisted that lying in bed too long would only make her feel weaker. She said she hated doing nothing while watching him work alone. She talked about the 10 o'clock flowers they bought before the rain and imagined how beautiful they would look hanging around the yard once they fully bloomed. Listening to her talk like that almost made the morning feel normal again. Almost. But Tone could still see the redness around her tired eyes. He could still hear how weak her voice sounded every time she spoke too long. He could still feel how cold her hands were when he helped her sit down. That was why he refused to let her help with anything outside. He lowered the kettle from the stove and quietly told her to rest while he prepared the flower pots and soil himself. Tu Diem still tried, following him toward the doorway anyway, stubbornly insisting she could at least sit outside and help separate the flower branches. Tone smiled softly at her determination, but the concern in his eyes never disappeared. He reminded her again that her throat was still sore and that forcing herself to work now would only make recovery take longer. Then he stepped outside to arrange the tools and bags of soil near the garden area, while constantly glancing back toward the house every few seconds. It became almost impossible not to notice how nervous he really was. Even while carrying bamboo poles and preparing the flower beds, his attention stayed fixed on Tu Diem. Then finally, he noticed her sitting near the doorway with one hand pressed against her forehead again. That single moment was enough to make him abandon everything he was doing. He immediately walked back inside, guided her gently toward the small bed beside the window, and asked her to lie down for a while. This time, Tu Diem didn't resist at all. The room grew quiet, except for the soft sound of boiling water and the wind moving through the bamboo trees outside. Tone sat beside her and slowly massaged her temples, carefully brushing strands of hair away from her face, while softly telling her to sleep for a little while, because resting would help ease the headache. Tu Diem tried to smile one more time, but exhaustion was already pulling her eyes closed. Little by little, she drifted to sleep beneath the soft afternoon light coming through the window. Still, Tone didn't move. He stayed sitting beside her long after she fell asleep, silently watching her pale face while the breeze carried the smell of rain deeper into the room. And in that quiet moment, the true emotional center of the story finally became clear. Toan wasn't simply taking care of someone who got sick from working too hard. He was sitting there like a man who had suddenly realized how fragile the person he loved really was. Like someone who understood that losing her was no longer just an impossible thought. It was a fear that had already begun living quietly inside him. By the time Tu Diem finally woke up, the rain clouds had almost completely disappeared, leaving behind a calm afternoon washed clean by the storm. Sunlight filtered softly through the bamboo trees surrounding the farm, touching the wet ground with a warm golden glow that felt completely different from the brutal heat of the previous days. For the first time in a while, the farm no longer felt heavy or suffocating. The air was cooler, the soil looked alive again, and even the silence around the house carried a strange kind of comfort. Tu Diem slowly stepped outside toward the small outdoor kitchen where Tone was arranging flower pots and bags of soil near the garden. The moment he saw her walking toward him, he immediately stopped what he was doing. His first question wasn't about the flowers or the garden. It was whether her headache had gotten any better. Tu Diem smiled softly and told him she felt stronger now, though the tiredness still lingered faintly in her voice. She insisted on making cakes like she promised earlier that morning because the cool weather after the rain finally made the kitchen bearable again. Toan hesitated for a second before finally agreeing. Though it was obvious he still wasn't fully comfortable letting her do too much. He stayed close the entire time, moving constantly between the yard and the kitchen, as if he needed to make sure she was all right every few minutes. Tu Diem carefully placed colorful bags of flour across the table while preparing the filling for the fried cakes. Green, purple, and white powders brightened the little kitchen beneath the soft afternoon light, making the entire space feel warmer and more alive. As the smell of sticky rice flour, sesame, and hot oil slowly filled the air, the atmosphere around them began to change too. For the first time all day, Tu Diem started smiling more naturally. She talked quietly about the cakes she used to make and sell at the market before, explaining which kinds people liked the most and which recipes took the longest to prepare. Toan listened carefully while leaning against the doorway, sometimes pretending to focus on the garden outside, even though his eyes constantly drifted back toward her. Every time she coughed lightly or paused for too long, he immediately asked if she was tired or needed water. At one point, he even turned on the fan beside her because he was worried the heat from the stove might make her dizzy again. There was no dramatic confession between them, no loud emotional moment, but somehow the quietness itself made everything feel more intimate. The farm no longer felt like a place filled only with exhaustion and survival. It felt like home. A little later in the afternoon, the peaceful atmosphere grew even warmer when Tu Diem's phone suddenly rang while she was shaping the final pieces of dough. It was Tu Fan. Because of the rain, she wasn't going harvesting that day and decided to come visit for a while. The moment Tu Diem heard her voice, her entire expression brightened instantly. She happily invited Tu Fan over to eat cakes together with her and Tuan. Not long afterward, Tu Fan arrived at the farm carrying the energy of someone who immediately made the house feel livelier. The moment she stepped into the kitchen and saw all the colorful cakes spread across the table, she laughed warmly before sitting down to help. Soon, the small kitchen filled with conversation, sizzling oil, and the comforting noise of people finally relaxing after difficult days. The three of them talked about the heavy rain, the damaged crops, and how the recent heat had nearly destroyed entire sections of farmland. Then, during the middle of an ordinary conversation, Tu Fan suddenly learned that Tu Diem had fainted while working outside a few days earlier. The atmosphere in the kitchen changed immediately. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Tu Fan slowly looked at Tu Diem's pale face and gently scolded her for working herself too hard under the sun. Tu Diem tried to laugh it off, quietly explaining that someone from her old farm happened to see her collapse and helped her in time. But near the doorway, Tone suddenly became completely silent. He kept working with the flower pots outside without looking up, yet viewers could immediately feel the weight in his silence. Because this wasn't just an unpleasant memory for him anymore. It was something that clearly haunted him. And when Tu Fan softly asked, "What if nobody had seen you that day?" the entire mood of the episode shifted. The kitchen grew quieter after that question. Even the sound of frying oil suddenly felt distant for a moment. Tu Diem lowered her eyes, while Tone continued pretending to focus on his work outside, though his expression had already darkened noticeably. Without needing to explain anything directly, the audience could finally understand the real reason behind his behavior since the beginning of the episode. He wasn't overprotective because he wanted control. He was terrified because he had already imagined losing her once. Slowly, the atmosphere softened again as the cakes finished cooking and everyone gathered around the small table to eat together. Plates of colorful sticky rice cakes sat beside golden fried pastries while steam rose gently into the cool evening air. Tone moved the fan closer so Tu Diem and Tu Fan could cool down while he quietly cleaned the kitchen around them. The little farmhouse suddenly felt less like a workplace and more like a real family home. Tu Fan joked about how Thu preferred savory food instead of sweets, and eventually the conversation drifted toward family meals, future plans, and how long it had been since everyone gathered together happily like this. Then, in the middle of those simple conversations, Tone quietly said something that completely changed the emotional direction of the episode. He looked at Tu Diem and told her that if harvesting ever became too difficult for her, she could stop working outside and come to the factory with him instead. He explained that there would always be work for her there, and that he would feel more at ease if she stayed somewhere closer to him every day. Tu Diem didn't answer immediately. She simply lowered her eyes and smiled softly while the sounds of quiet conversation continued around them. But the meaning behind his words was impossible to miss. This wasn't really about work anymore. It was about building a future where he could protect her from the exhaustion that nearly broke her. Later, after Tufan left, and evening sunlight stretched across the wet garden outside, Tone and Tu Diem worked quietly together, reinforcing the soil near the flower beds. They hammered bamboo stakes into the ground, carried fresh soil one shovel at a time, and carefully planted rows of 10 o'clock flowers along the small pathway leading toward the house. Their hands became covered in mud, while the golden light, after the rain, settled softly across the garden. At one point, Tone looked around the yard and quietly said that someday this place would become very beautiful. On the surface, it sounded like he was only talking about the flowers and the garden. But the emotional meaning behind those words felt much deeper than that. Because little by little, without directly saying it aloud, the two of them were no longer just repairing a farm together. They were building a life. And for the first time, after so many exhausting days filled with uncertainty, it finally felt like both of them could see a future waiting quietly ahead. After days of exhausting heat and hard work, Tu Diem becomes seriously weak following the season's first heavy rain. Worried about her condition, Tuan decides to stay home and take care of her instead of going to work. As the peaceful countryside slowly recovers after the storm, the two spend the day together, making cakes, planting flowers, and quietly sharing moments that reveal how deeply they care for each other. But beneath the calm atmosphere lies a painful memory that continues haunting Tuan after learning Tu Diem once fainted alone in the fields from exhaustion. When Tufan visits the farm, hidden emotions begin surfacing, turning an ordinary rainy day into a deeply emotional story about love, fear, healing, and hope. By the end of the day, Tone quietly reveals his dream of building a safer and more stable future for both of them.